start officially. Hello, everyone. I'm Marilyn Turkovich from the Charter for Compassion, the Executive Director. And one of the things that we have been so excited about is today's presentation with Lisa Miller. And as many of you know, this is a regular feature of the Charter for Compassion. It has been in the past on the first and the third Thursdays of each month. We settle back and consider some new approaches, some ideas, some programs, projects that are being done around the world. And as they reflect compassion and all of the attributes that are part of compassion. We've been really honored through the last year of having extraordinary people presenting programs that are really outstanding. And I just wanted to let you know that we continue working with the people who have come and been a part of this forum. And I noticed that Dr. Starita from another New Yorker, Starita Ansari, is here from the new 3Rs, and we are working with her to see how we might be able to offer the 3Rs through the Charter for Compassion platform. A number of weeks ago, we had Orla O'Sullivan, who's education coordinator from Thich Nhat Hanh's Plum Village, and so we are definitely going to put together, starting in the fall, a Sangha for teachers primarily to just come and experience some of the things that they have really generated through the work in the village. And I could go on, but I won't. However, you can go and visit our EducationNet forum, and you'll be able to see and view all of the recordings from these sessions. So let's move on to today. And there's a certain, I think, excitement in the air about having Lisa Miller with us. From the Spiritual Mind Body Institute. These are the kinds of topics that intrigue us at the Charter for Compassion. We are really committed to neuroscience and to looking at some of the extraordinary kinds of issues that are really part of compassion and compassion spreading and compassion throughout the world. You probably all know Lisa. That's why you're here. She is the professor of psychology and education at Columbia University at the Teachers College, and which has been a monumental institution unto its own through many decades. And so I'm not going to take any more time. I'm going to let Lisa and really start, and we want to use every minute that we possibly can. So Lisa, I'm going to turn this over to you, and you're just let us know what you might need. And anyone who has questions, you probably are familiar that you can definitely put your questions in the chat. We'll make certain to collect them, and hopefully we'll be able to get all of your questions answered. And if you have reflections as well, please put them there as well. Thank you. And Lisa, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. I am so delighted to join you and really want to celebrate the global community of educational innovation and the direction which your global community is moving, which is to really have the love and unit of awareness that we are one people on earth and collaborators, one field of education on earth. And it is with great delight that I share with you from the Spiritual Mind Body Institute, a body of science and its translation into educational practice and innovation. The Spirituality Mind Body Institute is about 2 decades old, and it is a site for convening around educational innovation and implementation, as well as a site for basic science publication. And it's our hope to bring the superb work going on around the world into the spotlight and welcome and elevate interested fellow educators onto a public stage to share what you're already doing, and to exchange practices, language, and innovation. So my first point here is one of invitation. I'd like to invite you to join us in person in October 22 and 23, for Awakened Schools, the spiritual core in the whole child. We welcome all of you to share how spirituality might inform, direct, bring life to your work in whole child education. And we welcome, this is a big tent, people from character education, facing history and ourselves, SEL, whatever your pathway is. We want to put forward a common meeting ground, if you will, a crossroads, through which we can, as a global community, share educational innovation. It's been 7 or 8 years ago, I published a book called The Spiritual Child, and I went on the road for what I thought would be about 2 months, and it became 3 years, as what I very quickly saw was that spirituality is alive and well in education, but it is somehow decentralized. It had yet at that point to know itself as a field, to be, if you will, had yet to be established a hub. And so here's our hub. It's a hub of sharing, and it's a hub of further instantiation of the field of spirituality in whole child education. The second part of my invitation is to join us for our Teachers College-based Awakened School Institute. Here, we invite you into an 8-week online journey into the science, practice, and innovation, which I'm going to share with you today. And then if there's a critical mass of educators in your school interested in doing this work of a spiritually supportive school, then we come to you for 2 days and join you in a collaborative intensive through which this model in your own language, cultural tradition, and mission is translated into your own school. Both of these opportunities are free. They're funded by grants, and they are given to you with love, open-handedly. Today, I'm going to share with you the basic science and the applied intervention science on which both of these initiatives are based. So let's start at the beginning, and in particular, let me frame what has come to the fore in the United States through the Surgeon General's once and an administration call to action. Some of you may recall in the United States that about 30 years ago, pushing 40, was issued the Surgeon General's warning: smoking may be dangerous for your health, spread across cigarette packages. In this administration, the equivalent warning and call for action was on mental health, and in particular, mental health in youth. The rates of the diseases of despair, addiction, depression, and even suicide have become the foremost challenge to young adult and adolescent mental health. Is this the business of schools? Yes. Whole child wellness, whole child survival is the business of schools. And yet, as we have traditionally approached the challenge of mental health, we look at each young person individually. He meets criteria for major depression. She has a dual diagnosis of anxiety and addiction. There's locating, in general, the tendency for mental health in the individual. But given an epidemic, even before COVID, but of course exacerbated by the past 2+ years, given the epidemic of the diseases of despair, perhaps we might look at the social ecology, indeed the spiritual social ecology surrounding young people, rather than locate at the level of the individual the suffering that may be incurred through the air and water of the global post-industrial culture. The rate of suicide has surpassed the rate of death by auto accident in high school. It is the #1 killer of youth, pressing down into middle school. Our own institution of Columbia University had over 9 suicides in 1 year. It was such a challenge and so unprecedented that the wellness coordinator was faced with a job that had devolved into cleaning out students' bedrooms before the parents arrived. This was something that we had yet to understand. In the arc of wellness, there's a termination at treatment and maintenance, but a start at the point of development, wellness, prevention, early intervention, treatment, and maintenance. Education might embrace the full arc but particularly every single child, for every single student, the beginning of the arc, development, wellness, and early prevention is relevant. So what do we now know? Well, first, to clarify, as many of you know, spirituality and religion are not the same thing. They go hand in hand for many people. About 70% of people say, I am spiritual and I am religious. They are at the intersection. My deep transcendent experience, my sense of love and unity and guidance in life, it is held in the prayers of my faith tradition, the meditations. My sense of deep relationship to the higher power, that I am held and loved and guided, it is held in the text, the ceremonies, the community of my religious faith. About 30% of people say I am spiritual, but I am not religious. For me, spirituality is experienced in my family, in nature, in music and art. What the science now shows is that whether or not we are religious, every single one of us on earth is a naturally spiritual being. Just as we have 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, we are born with an innate capacity for spiritual life. This is our birthright. It may be shaped and formed through the rich embrace of our faith tradition. But if we have never encountered a tradition, we still are a naturally spiritual being. This distinction is particularly important to public institutions. I have worked extensively with the Pentagon for near 2.5 years, and this distinction has allowed us to support every soldier. You know, there's 300,000 young 18 through 25-year-old soldiers, every soldier's spiritual core. Of course it is legal, of course it is constitutional, because the science shows that just as we are physical, emotional, and cognitive beings, so too we are spiritual beings. Now, how do we know this? And here I hand you the roadmap of basic science from which we can discern points of intervention and support, from which we might have a lens, through which we have a lens to understand every student, irrespective of what culture, GPS coordinate, zipped up bio bodysuit, or faith tradition they may be from. This is a science of our human nature. There are 2 dimensions of lived human spiritual life, inborn in all people. They may be developed or left to lay atrophy, but they are all of ours. How do we know this? We know this in science through a twin study. We can look at twins raised together and twins raised apart and factor out the degree of commonality in spiritual life as a function of shared genes and shared environment. By way of example, IQ is about 60% innate, 40% environmentally formed. Temperament is about half innate, half environmentally formed. If you think of young babies who you've known, we come rather laid back or more tightly wound. We come perhaps more extroverted or introverted. This is our natural temperament. And yet how we embrace, shape, guide, socialize the young child is about half of the story onto the formation of their temperament. The capacity through which we experience universal spiritual awareness is 1/3 innate, 2/3 environmentally formed, which means 2/3. While spirituality is indeed our birthright, this capacity is shaped in the first 2 decades of life by our grandparents and parents, our community, the 10,000 exchanges by our school locker, the culture and mission of our schools, relationships with teachers, counselors, coaches. 2/3 environmentally formed means that we are not a tabula rasa, but we are highly, highly shaped by the embrace of our childhood. Now, here's the challenge. In the United States, and I invite you in our discussion to share how in each of your own countries you've seen this unfold. In the United States, 40 years ago, we threw religion out of the public square, which is to say, very quickly, we became a society that didn't speak much about either spirituality or religion. Very little. And in fact, in most places of work, if someone wants to speak from their spiritual heart, they'll walk you way in the corner and say it very quietly. Spirituality was extricated from the comings and goings of the public square. And with this 40 years ago, went the spiritual baby with the bathwater, the rich embrace in the air and water of our culture for the universal spiritual core. And with this went the ability to be spiritually conversant, to be able to take a deep interest in the fact that you're Catholic and you've, with tears in your eyes, just told me about the baptism of your child, or that you are Hindu and you're telling me about visiting your grandparents and the ceremony they share. I'm Jewish and you want to hear about Hanukkah, or the most holy day of our year, Yom Kippur, and the universal experiences of birth and crossing over at death, illness and renewal community, silent in the public square. Well, 40 years is long enough for someone to grow up, have a child who grows up and is in your school, and may have a completely empty 2/3 embrace onto the spiritual core. This is unprecedented. Many young people still have a strong spiritual core, but never have so many not. Many, never, as we face high school, as we face entry-level jobs, as we face young soldiers in the Army, had so many young people who had no sacred text whatsoever or moral code derived from ultimate reality, had never prayed or engaged in any transcendent experience, meditation, anything at all by the side of a parent or grandparent, who do not know themselves as being of infinite worth, emanations like rays from the sun of sacred worth. I have 3 children. My youngest came to me in middle school. Mommy, look, quick, mommy, look on the phone. And there on the phone, a young girl had posted, I can't take it anymore. I'm in terrible pain. I am ending my life. What might you imagine would follow that? The postings from the other young people online. Tell your parent, get help. Hold on, you'll feel better another day. But instead, you go, girl. It's your right. It's your life. No one can tell you what to do. Suicide is no longer viewed as sacrosanct. Our lives are no longer viewed as derived from ultimate reality. My word is God, yours might be the higher power, Jesus, Hashem, Allah, whatever word reflects the source of all life and the inherent value in our lives is not in the tidal wave. It is not here. This is our challenge. Now, basic science tells us there are 2 specific dimensions. One, of spiritual life, identified through the lens of science, that we have a transcendent relationship with the deep source in and through life. Again, my word is God, the universe, Jesus, Hashem, a deep, not just belief, but felt sense of connection through which we are loved and held. We are guided and we are never alone. Why do we wait until people bottom out in Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous to hand it over? Why do we wait until a trauma like COVID to realize that some things are bigger than our human bio bodysuit can carry, that we need to give it to someone more? The capacity to be in relationship, a transcendent relationship, is our birthright. And just as we see energy, spirit, force, love in a relationship, so too we see the source of life in one another. Love of neighbor, altruism. These 2 dimensions are seen in the science to be our birthright. And when realized, when strengthened, all around the world, we've looked in India, we've looked in China, we've looked through all different lenses of science, these dimensions can be supported. It is in the history of humanity, fellowship, the anipi, bar and bat mitzvah, coming of age in adolescence has been marked as intertwined with an augmented spiritual life. A search for meaning, a question of ultimate significance. In a study of 11 countries, Benson and colleagues found that all around the world, Thailand, Ukraine, Uganda, Canada, there was a surge to know one's ultimate purpose in relationship to the ultimate reality. There was a hunger to know the truth of how the world's really built, a quest to be loved and giving and altruistic. There was rich, beautiful cultural diversity. Remember the 2/3 embrace of faith tradition, culture, varieties of language and beliefs, but the core level of perception and its emergence in adolescence was universal. When the core is supported, there is nothing as protective in the clinical or social sciences against the diseases of despair. Published in peer review, top psychiatric and clinical journals, there's nothing as protective against addiction, depression, and even suicide. A teen, a standard deviation above as compared to below the mean, and a tendency to say, my personal spirituality is highly important to me, is at 80% decreased relative risk of addiction using diagnostic criteria, 70% less likely to take risks, drive fast, jump out the second story window, less likely to have major depression, where we have a hard time getting up, where it's painful to get through the day. And in a study of studies, a consummate meta-analysis, Wu and colleagues identified a 62% decreased relative risk of completed suicide when there's a strong spiritual core, and that goes up to 82% when spiritual life is shared. Again, just as we feel the sense of connection to spirit, to godliness, to some force of life through which all life is valuable, so too we see one another in relationship, love of neighbor, altruism. There's nothing in the clinical or social sciences as profoundly protective. And so much so is this the case that if there were a little pill that I could give my emerging adolescents and teenagers that would create this level of protective benefit against the diseases of despair, there is nothing by a matter of threefold, fourfold as protective as this. And yet this is our birthright. How do we realize our birthright? And in particular, what does this mean as we come out of COVID, and hopefully as a global community we'll grow ever closer together? But should there ever again be trauma, dislocation, difficult times, how will our children, by you in schools, be prepared? Well, here is a graph of our greatest human strength. This is a graph of post-traumatic growth against level of despair. And what you see as we go out the x-axis, increased levels of struggle. Everyone here meets criteria for trauma, more anxiety, more sleeplessness, more despair. Well, as we go out the x-axis, you see more and more and more growth. We are built to grow. Trauma is a doorway for a deepening of growth until we get so far out the curve that we need support to grow. But this is our birthright, and this is how we are built. How do we support post-traumatic growth? This is a study by Tsai, and colleagues. Tedeschi and colleagues found 4 predictors of getting up on this curve: access to the experience and sharing it in words. Access, putting it in words, and that it might be shared, and then shining the light of spiritual awareness onto the painful memory, the painful present, through which there is a reshuffling of meaning. And then I realized that we are both not to blame. And then I realized that we are still held in our darkest hour. And now I know that even when I fail, I am loved and can love. Whatever that reshuffling of meaning is a form of awareness that is not brought by repeating and spinning our wheels, or through the most common form of treatment, which is systematic desensitization, weaving a narrative. Instead, it is formed through the reshuffling of meaning brought through spiritual awareness. So much so is this the case that 75% of vets who report PTSD at the same time report meaningful growth. And on the other side, we are not made less. It is not just a crater in our lives, but the struggle through which we have growth draws us closer to those who before we may have even been ashamed to see. It brings us closer into the 2 dimensions of natural spirituality, the 2 dimensions of natural spirituality, which we know are the foothold of resilience and renewal. So we are not made less, we are not brought back to baseline, but through a post-traumatic spiritual growth, we are made more. It is not recovery, it is renewal. This can be built in childhood. How? With every small despair, with every small loss, we can effectively inoculate the child by building from the spiritual core, bringing forth natural spirituality, a response to suffering, a spiritual response to suffering. Where is the spiritual core? Well, it is here. We published this in JAMA Psychiatry in 2014. And normally in an MRI study, there's a tiny little speck and everyone says, oh, there's a brain correlate. Well, these are enormous regions represented in red of perception and reflection and orientation, regions that are thick. There's cortical thickness across these regions that otherwise are thin in people with recurrent major depression. And the thickness is even greater as it goes hand in hand with sustained spiritual life in people who are otherwise at risk. Sustained spiritual life goes hand in hand with cortical thickness across regions of what might be called the spiritual brain. We can awaken through the process of struggle. We can awaken through pain, a stronger use of our natural endowment. We can awaken our spiritual brain. When we do, cortical thickness across these regions today prospectively predicts decreased depression a year from now. What this means is that suffering, depression is a gateway to a strengthening of our spiritual awareness. We awaken our spiritual brain, and our awakened awareness not only adds a great depth and meaning to our lives, it girds us against a subsequent depression. Suffering is an opportunity of our lifetimes, and as educators and counselors and people in leadership positions, suffering in our students is the opportunity of their lifetime for spiritual growth that will gird them against future traumas, future disappointments, the reshuffling, the crack in the earth where life as we know it doesn't hold. They will turn to a deeper bearing and have a deeper, stronger resilience in the troubles that may, God forbid, come ahead. And not only that, life will gain. Life will gain in its significance, its service, as if we had a deeper lens into life itself. This is who we are, and this is our birthright. I share in the awakened brain stories and practices through which we may get to an awakening of our natural spiritual brain, through which we can build our awakened brain. And I share a great number of scientific references. Why? Because science, of course, for a deeply spiritual person doesn't prove spirituality, but science mirrors lived spiritual life. Science is an extraordinarily powerful tool for making institutional transformation, which is why the awakened brain has been read by thousands of people in the US Army. The awakened brain is the template for work that we do in public and independent schools, supporting the natural awakened awareness of every student and every teacher in a way that is inclusive, constitutional, and aligned with the mission of that specific school. In this sense, it is ultimately culturally inclusive and embracing because we authorize schools, teachers, heads, principals, superintendents to know their own culture and merely engage in a translation of this developmental map into their own lived school culture. So I'll share with you in brief that not only, in recap, do we have a natural spirituality that burgeons in children and young adults, teens and young adults. It is highly sensitive to impact, in fact, even more sensitive in the years of puberty. How do we know that? There's a 50% increase in the heritable contribution, which means bring from the inside out a high school student is highly sensitive to your impact. Not only is there profound protective benefits, but the strength of the spiritual core grows ever stronger through suffering if supported, so that we are then protected against the next series of challenges or disappointments. To look at the upside, I'm going to invite you to think of young people who you've known with an extraordinary sense of optimism. Now someone with commitment, and now someone with grit. How many people were you thinking of? You've met many wonderful young people, but very often people say one, and this is why. The character strengths and virtues, forgiveness, gratitude, optimism, grit at the x-axis, cluster in the same people. These are organically derived categories on 5,500 college students using latent class analysis. Those folks represented in blue are high in everything, so much so that the character strengths and virtues might be viewed foundationally as character, virtue. And the folks in red who we love and teach and support equally are low in everything, and that's a tough ride. How do we help the students in red get up to green or even blue? Well, all efforts at the extraordinary work that's been developed around the character strengths and virtue and SEL will be that much more profoundly penetrating, long-standing. The roots go that much deeper when we also support the spiritual core. Whether we are blue, green, or red, high, medium, or low, in the character strengths and virtues goes hand in hand on the far left with daily spiritual awareness. And when we looked longitudinally, it was daily spiritual awareness today to be predictive of character strengths a year out. The spiritual core is foundational to the whole child. I would go so far to say that given the 25 years of data from our lab and fellow labs around the world, there is only whole child wellness when there is a strong spiritual core. It may be within a faith tradition, it may be outside a faith tradition, but a foundational, strong spiritual core is essential. It is a necessary condition for whole child strength, health, and wellness. Here's the rough work, the challenging work, the exciting work of growing up. Who am I? Who are you? What's the nature of the world and what is my moral duty in it? Let's look at a few of these. This is on page 246 of The Spiritual Child, or you can screenshot it. I'll get out of the way. Here's the hard work of growing up with a spiritual core and without. Well, who am I? Number one, who are we? Who am I? In a public square, silent on the spiritual core, who am I? Well, I am number one in AP chemistry, and I'm in the top 10% of all my AP. I am very intelligent. Actually, I'm in the bottom third. I really struggle with school. Who am I? I was on varsity tennis as a sophomore. I'm one of the best athletes in my school. Actually, I was cut as a junior. I am my outward performance, my parts and pieces. I am defined by what I can do, by what I have, how I deliver. A public square silent on the spiritual core is a world of measurement. Well, where's the fragility in that? Say I am very, very smart. I'm in the top 10%, and I am so smart that I am going off to MIT. I'm gonna be an engineer. But then I get there and suddenly I'm not oh so smart. I look around me and I'm in the bottom quarter. Right now, outside of Palo Alto High School, there's a train track with a fence and a security guard following a cluster of suicides ensuing from disappointments in performance. What am I when I fail? Well, if I'm oh so smart and I'm failing, that is an existential annihilation. There is nothing left. If you can delay a kid for 5 minutes from taking his or her life, they are unlikely to, which is why clusters of suicides in Rye, New York, and Palo Alto at Columbia University need to be understood preemptively through support of the whole child and the spiritual core. Let's tell that same challenge with a spiritual core. Well, I was top of my class in high school. I get to MIT, I'm in the bottom 10%. That's disappointing, but that is not who I am. Who am I? I am a soul on earth, a being of infinite worth, an emanation of God. I am a child of God. What is it to be smart? Well, that is an endowment through which I might carve my ultimate purpose, my contribution. It is not who I am. It is the gift through which I can contribute. So the day I'm in the bottom 10%, it is again very disappointing, but it is noise on the trajectory of my larger purpose, my calling, my contribution. Now, if I'm a soul on earth, you're a soul on earth. And our relationship is about interest. It's about encouragement. On a tough day, it is about forgiveness. But it is not narrowly about competition of your performance against mine, that you made varsity and I was cut, that you're going to MIT and I'm having a hard time getting into college. There is much more to us. We are sisters, we are brothers. And on a really tough day, there's a lot more room to forgive. In the Army, you are in my squad. In the classroom, You are in my grade. We are bonded in a way like family. So how, when we look at the ability for a spiritual core to inform ethics, to inform self-identity, to inform relational ethics, to inform health and wellness, how do we take this basic science, this powerful basic science, and use it to inform K-12 schools? Well, here's where, as scientists, we knew that there were experts who knew much more than us on support for the spiritual core. We turned to master teachers all around the country. And we turned to experienced educators with decades, 20, 30 years of experience in public and private schools, schools with religion in the mission statement and schools with no religion whatsoever in the mission statement. We turned to a vast array and formed, and now welcome you into a collaborative for spirituality and education. We were generously funded by Fetzer Institute. We are supported by Rockefeller Philanthropic. We are located, our hub is at Teachers College, and we invite you into the use of this roadmap of science on spiritual development across childhood and adolescence for a healthy, thriving, ethical young adult to join us. For 3 years, we went around the country. Now, as you probably know, the moment you step into the lobby, in the front lobby, you know if you've walked into a spiritually supportive school. The gentleman at the desk, the head of school, the 8th grade boy, you know you're there. Well, in our study, over 3 years, we asked teachers, heads of schools, students to tell us about their school, to tell us so that we could start to learn from them as master educators what was spiritually supportive, transformative in their school. Again, schools with religion, schools without religion, schools focused on nature, schools in the inner city, public schools, private schools. We wanted to learn from master teachers. The first thing we learned was that the vast majority of good efforts to date are held in curriculum that lands on the desk of the student and a companion on the part of the teacher. These excellent curriculum are very well developed and in existence, fairly well disseminated as well. But what was unique in spiritually supportive schools that had yet to be captured and shared was in the intentionally designed relational culture and climate. Our first finding was that spiritually supportive schools offer the 2/3 embrace onto the spiritual core through the relational culture and climate. We then watched ceremonies, we watched recess, we sat in on classrooms, we interviewed heads, we were very graciously invited into curated visits where we could hit the high points, see the most transformative rituals, practices in the community. And what we saw was that no matter whether this was a public or private school, whether it was religiously driven or not, whether it was highly resourced or not highly resourced, there were at least 11 drivers. In all of these schools, some emphasized 8, others 10. And I'll share with you a few examples. One, there's a school-wide practice of transcendence through which there's a receptive, if you will, catch in the catcher's mitt of inspiration and a language to understand transcendent awareness, what I call awakened awareness. There's a school-wide language of the sacred, of spiritual values, again, with or without a faith tradition. There is a keeper of the flame, someone whose full-time job it is, and they're paid to stand up and embody the voice of spiritual values and is welcome to confront the head of school or a faculty meeting on, are we listening to our heart? Are we following our school's mission when it comes to our spiritual values? Ritual, a connection with nature where we don't just observe the beauty, but draw into deep relationship with nature. We interviewed an 8th grade boy who said in kindergarten, we were all invited to pick a tree. That over there, that's my tree. Well, he was all grown up and about to graduate 8th grade and go to high school. And he said, you know, I've been to that tree just to have quiet moments. When I'm sad, I've been to that tree and the tree has helped me, held me. I'm really going to miss my tree. This is a spiritually supportive school in the air and water. So we invite you into our Awakened School Institute, 8 weeks of an intensive look into this held in science, practice, and sharing amongst educators. And then an intensive collaborative visit to your school where on your own terms, you see where you would like to grow spiritual support in your school. I'm going to hand this over now to my colleague, Dr. Lauren Foley, who helped us as we created the 11 drivers, the roadmap, so that any school can become an awakened school. Dr. Foley collaborated closely as our project director during a time where we distilled 3 years of wisdom from master educators across the United States into the DNA of a spiritually supportive school. Dr. Foley, welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. So I wanted to speak a little bit today around my experience visiting the schools and some, I think, stories and quotes from the actual data that sort of bring a lot of these concepts to life. So I would just like to start kind of by saying that initially, even when you walked into these schools who were part of our project, the strong kind of spiritually supportive culture was felt really just even when you walked in the lobby and were greeted by the head of school and the fellow of the school. They were really very clear around sort of their mission. And it was really evident as we sort of walked around the grounds of the campus. So my particular kind of expertise from the project that we collaborated on was really looking at the nature component of the 11 drivers. And I did my dissertation kind of focusing on 4 specific schools that had strong environmental education programs where students really came to know themselves through nature and in dialogue with nature. So I wanted to share with you just a little bit about each of those programs and some student voices to really describe how they came to have an experience of transcendence or spirituality while in nature. So our first, one of the schools had a very strong, I'll also use some pseudonyms, so I'm not giving away who the schools are, but a very strong horse program or stallion program. And immediately when students came in freshman year, they were given a horse to take care of. And some of the responsibilities around this were kind of getting up at 6 a.m., really mucking the horse's stall in the morning before going to class. And we know with young freshmen that even kind of getting them to show up for an 8 a.m. class is really challenging. So having to care for another living being was part of this program. And really it was done to form connectedness to the school community, to give the students an experience of having a deep lived relationship with an animal, and to be able to kind of foster in them that idea and that guidance that there are many forms of knowing, and that they can actually have their own personal relationship with this horse. So I'm going to share with you some student quotes. And because you've seen a PowerPoint, I'm going to actually just read them to you so that we're not kind of on PowerPoint overload. But riding is usually said to be an individual sport, and at most places it is. But at Tabiona, riding is a bonding experience that culminates at the school's annual horse event, when we all race each other and go through obstacle courses. Seeing the difference between the timid and inexperienced freshmen we were in November and the confident and skilled riders that raced in May was a triumphant and fulfilling experience. I felt so proud of all of us. So you can really kind of see within just sort of that student voice that this was a real moment of bonding with this student's freshman class, and an experience of really connecting with the horse, and knowing that their peers were all kind of going through that same experience. Another piece I wanted to share about this school, Dr. Miller talked about one of the 11 drivers being transformative relationships. And what we really saw through the data was that whenever spirituality was talked about, either explicitly or not explicitly, it was really in these moments of deep and meaningful connection, whether that was connection to self, connection to another faculty member, to appear connection while in nature. So I wanted to share with you this piece from one of the educators too, that kind of speaks to this point. So as an educator at Tabiona, a deep way of being is to look into the eye of a student you're working with and feel that you're really communicating, that you're in the act of both listening and being listened to, that you're sharing in that sense of awe of the universe. Sometimes the universe isn't the great star field in the sky, but instead the human spirit we all share. Tabiona has a spirituality of relationships. So in a lot of these schools, we really, I mean, it was just so clear to me too, visiting, that the relationship itself was sacred between faculty and students, between peers, and that was really kind of felt throughout the school. And so another school that I wanted to touch on was, I'll call it Mapleton, and this school had both a zoo on campus, a farm, and a recycling program. And as part of their environmental education program, and as part of their kind of ethos around building community at that school. And I wanted to just take a moment to touch on how you could also take a restorative approach to discipline, and how some of these schools took this approach that really held spirituality and community and nature at the center. So I'll share with you kind of this excerpt from the data, and then I'll speak a little to it. So a large locust tree fell on Mr. Smith's house, one of our deans and teachers, over on the far side of campus, in the third storm, I guess about a month ago or 3 weeks ago. I spent the bulk of yesterday afternoon with one of my students who had a bit of work detail because he was struggling to really understand the bigger picture at Mapleton, shall we say. But we worked for about 4 hours together to cut up some large stumps, really, just 16 inches by however wide the trunk of the tree was, to put out there as little sitting stools for children, that we have kind of a teaching space where they can all sit on the stumps and we can present something to them. And the ones that we have out there now are a little smaller and they're getting old. So these are brand new ones. But again, it was involving students in the project and getting that done. So here at this particular school, when you get in trouble for something, when you skip community service, when you cut a class, it's not detention after school kind of sitting at a desk. You're actually now given something that's meaningful to do, that's directly related to like what you skip. So this person kind of had skipped out on some of the community involvement. And so this was a way to get them involved in nature and in community, doing something in relationship with one of their faculty members that's meaningful. So even the discipline was meaningful and oriented around spirituality and oriented around nature. Another school, and this was, I think, a really important point, because some of the schools we visited were completely immersed in nature. Others were inner city schools. And so how do you kind of work as a inner city school, or as a school that's more centrally located in downtown LA or New York City, in terms of bringing things in to cultivate this spirituality in students, or this connection to nature? And so this particular school, which was located in LA, had an outdoor service learning program where at least for a week every year, students were brought out to have kind of an intimate experience with either a mountain or a body of water, or camping. So they really worked to get students out into nature. And that was a common theme among these kind of inner city schools. And so I wanted to share a personal experience of this student and what they shared with us in terms of how this program has impacted them. And they said, this program has impacted my life significantly. By being exposed to the natural world in a way that I had never been exposed to it before, I learned how vital being in nature is to humans, especially teenagers. There are two memories from my time there this summer that perfectly enunciate this. The second memory was on the last day of the trip, when we were back at camp. I was sitting by the stream looking out at the meadow. The birds were singing, the grass was dancing, the wildflowers smelled sweet, the trees were standing happy and strong, and the mountains were looking as magnificent as ever. I suddenly had a strong urge just to be more a part of it. So I quietly crept across the brook and sat under a willow, distancing myself from the people. It was then that I saw a doe and her two tiny fawns. They couldn't see me, but I just sat there and watched in awe. I still think about that day all the time. And truthfully, ever since then, I've had a constant nagging urge to be back. Being at that place makes me feel whole. And while backpacking and getting dirty may not be everyone's thing, I honestly believe that everyone needs what it provides. So I share that again to just illustrate that so much of what we saw in these schools was facilitating and providing opportunities for deep and meaningful connection. Whether nature was the reason that that connection was able to happen, or whether it was in deep relationship with faculty or with peers, that was really kind of what emerged from the data, was these experiences of transcendence that took place in various avenues, and that was kind of made possible by the facilitation of faculty and by the head and the fellow. So I think that's pretty much what I kind of wanted to share, just a couple of stories and experiences from my visits to the school that illustrate, I think, in a story way, some of the points that Dr. Miller was talking about. So I'll turn it back over to Dr. Miller for Q&A, and thanks for letting me be here today. It was great to be involved.
Dr. Foley, thank you. And thank you for getting up bright and early from Alaska to join us.
You're welcome.
Shall we move to discussion and Q&A?
Yeah, we can certainly do that. Thank you both, and especially Lisa, for everything that you offered to us. And, you know, throughout the presentation, I kept reverting back to having been an urban principal of a school, just about 1,400 students. And, you know, I thought about, you know, some of our success, and I thought about some of the things where we might not have cut the mustard so much. And I think that one of the most important things was really helping people use their voice, understand the connection that they had to one another through opportunities of being responsible, not only to one another in the school, but also, you know, building ownership of everything that happened in the school, hiring people, doing reviews, making decisions, and how important that is. And I'm excited about the possibility of people here sharing some of their experiences and offering some observations. And we do have one question, and I'm going to read it for you, Bob, but if you want to turn on your mic, you are more than welcome to ask your question yourself.
Yeah, I'm interested in a concept I call conditional belonging, because I see it as rampant and really so many ways that our schools seem to support it. And it's basically belonging on how you're perceived in what you do rather than who you are. And a big part of that is belonging by exclusion, which happens among the kids, but there's very few places that seem to recognize that or to do anything to deal with it or prevent it. And I wonder what thoughts you have on what schools can do to create an atmosphere that fosters authentic belonging.
Bob, thank you. I think you've really hit the nail on the head. I think that's at the core of a spiritually supportive culture. I would call it conditional love. And I can share with you that one of our colleagues, Dr. Sonia Luther, looked at high schools outside of highly resourced communities and found that the presence of conditional love, at least the child's perception of conditional love, was felt when the parents came each day and said, "Hey, how was the math test?" instead of, "I'm so glad to see you." Or when everyone showed up for the soccer tournament, but no one was at dinner. This notion that being unto ourselves, a soul on earth, a being of infinite worth, love right here matters. I'll share with you a few examples of how we saw the deliberate cultivation of a relational culture that reverses contingent love or conditional belonging. At one of the schools, every school has a different name, the vice principal, the second in command, put up slides during the faculty meeting of students who were more introverted, students who by other students might have been othered or set to the side. And he invited faculty. He said, who in this room knows this student really well? Who is a special person, a go-to person for this student? Who can tell us about this student? And usually at this school that spent a lot of time doing practices such as this, there was someone, but sometimes there was no one. And within a week, there was. I'll do it. I'd like to be that person. They're in my class. I'm their coach. So the notion that who are we as faculty? Well, yes, we teach subject, but we are there as guides. We are ambassadors. We're there to walk with them, as you say. We're there to know them on the other side of their eyes as a soul on earth. Many examples of this at that school. Other schools do it in other ways. For instance, in advisement, the advisor at one school, yes, what are you taking and what's going on today? But an advisor group once a week, what is your ultimate purpose? And what you're doing here this week got to do with your ultimate purpose? And as each student shares this, they listen to one another in a way where they're riveted and they bond and they belong. So at least that hour each day, there's the type of bond that you might see in a faith community or in a community of contribution like Habitat for Humanity, where we are walking it together in service. And so I think you're raising something extremely important. And I'll just end in response on science that calls the urgency forth of what you've described. I teamed up with Dr. Luther several years ago. Dr. Luther had found very, very high rates of depression, addiction, and anxiety in the inner city. So merely to create a control group, she'd gone to highly resourced schools outside of San Francisco, outside of New York. And to her surprise and to the surprise of the field, found rates of addiction and depression and anxiety in highly resourced high schools that far exceeded the rates in the inner city. The kids were doing worse on the inside. And when she looked under the hood, she looked at the tidal wave, the social ecology of these schools. She'd go in, round up students and say, can you tell me who's really popular here? And everyone knew, oh, that group of boys, they're really that girl, she's super popular. She'd come back a week later, invite new students to speak, and said, tell me about that girl. Tell me about that circle of boys, to determine the lived behavioral correlates of belonging, of popularity. So highly resourced communities, very highly resourced communities, what might you imagine were the two correlates of being very popular in girls? Number one, weight, parts and pieces. Number two, mean girls, interpersonal aggression being used to instantiate rank, like the movie Mean Girls. And again, these are beautiful souls on earth, culturated in the tidal wave, parts and pieces. You're worth your weight. Okay, in boys, number one predictor was actually substance use. Popular boys use drugs or use drugs to be popular. And the second correlate was not intimacy, but notches on the exploitation of girls. So in this parts and pieces, this, if you will, it's almost capitalism as a moral theory, it's parts and pieces economy. The soul is completely lost. And when that student culture leaks into a parent culture and a school-wide pedagogical culture of you are as good as your performance and your parts, it exacerbates in a deep way this, if you will, this parts and pieces economy of kids, of students. So I think it is urgent, and I think what you raise is at the hub of a spiritually supportive culture and climate, that we see each other as souls on earth, as valuable for walking in the door, for being.
I'd like to hear your comment on the role of fear in that whole process.
Thank you, Bob. I hope you'll join us. Okay, fear. Performance in many of these schools was driven by fear. What if? What if? So I have a colleague, and it was driven by parents even more than students. So I have a colleague, Dr. Andy Newberg, and he looked at the level of the brain. Okay, and he looked at people who view life as a journey, as a spiritual quest, as a discovery, as a journey, versus people who are completely foreclosed and only look in terms of outcome. So really it's the difference between narrowly transactional relationships and transformational relationships. And what he found was that in people who were highly transactional and really quite foreclosed on life as a journey, life as a spiritual quest, when he showed them signs of good and evil, they perceived at the level of the occipital cortex, ding, they literally saw with their eyes the symbols of good, a heart, a peace sign, for some a Christian cross or a Jewish star. When he put up signs of evil, there was not even a registration of evil. And yet the amygdala, the fear box, ran. So only saw the good, did not witness the evil, and yet was in a sustained sense of fear, like life was fight or flight. He conducted the same experiment on people whose lives are a journey, people who are on a spiritual quest, whether or not they feel they found an answer. Life is a journey, a spiritual quest. They saw the good, they saw the evil equally. At the level of the occipital cortex, with their eyes, they saw good and evil. And yet the amygdala was down. They did not feel fear. So when we strengthen a spiritual sense in living of who we are, walking with transformational, not transactional marketplace relationships, we develop a stance where we can tolerate the witness of good and tolerate the witness of evil and still feel a sense of connection and love. When we foreclose the sense of connection, of a journey, of love, we only see the good, and yet there's such a chronic sense of fear. So my translation to parent culture is that, I have not been with a group of parents professionally or personally in 20 years where there was an acknowledgement of the greatest genuine threats that are going on. And yet there's a constant culture of fear that takes voice at the level of the front door. What if I don't get into the state school? What if I don't get into UCLA? What if I don't get the promotion? What if? The what ifing, the I've got to have it, is leading to a constant state of anxiety and fear that actually has the neural correlates of addiction. So we've really, in our air and water, made kids sick. And we have here, these eminent leaders in education have the collective impact to shift the conversation and make school culture and climate about transformational relationships, about unconditional love, belonging. When we do that, we use a whole different circuit in the brain. I call it the awakened brain, but it's the capacity to see more deeply into life, to be more innovative, to be more loving, and to naturally feel a unit of connection between one another.
I'm wondering if there are any other observations, questions. We have people from a number of other countries here. And Arun, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I've been thinking about in India, how it is that there's a recognition of diversity and cultural difference and appreciation, and obviously an undergirth of spirituality that is shared between students in many schools, not all schools. But
And may I just request Guard to go first? He had his hand
okay.
up.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that, Guard.
That's fine. So after Guard, I'll speak.
Okay, good.
I'm going to say that I had my most transformational spiritual experience in India. So Arun, I'm going to tip it back to you.
Thank you, Guard, and thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Lauren, for a wonderful presentation. So I think in India, we have a very strong cultural heritage of spirituality. And I think it's about a deep connection with who we really are. And we believe that at our core, we are an ocean of compassion, an ocean of love. And the same ocean of love is in the other person. So when we say namaste, it means the ocean of love that you are and the ocean of love that I am are really the same. And I see that in you. I salute that in you. And of course, a very, very strong connection with nature. I think all our rituals are about honoring trees and snakes and birds and, celebrating nature in a beautiful way. So I think we're very, very blessed to have a very strong, holistic and connected sense of I think what Lisa described, the wholesome connection with life. I think the other thing that happens, Madeline, is that we believe that every single race, every single person is like a wave on the same ocean. So no matter what the color of your skin, or no matter what shape or size or whatever you are, we are all waves on the ocean of life. So I think through our stories, through our mythology, through our rituals, through the kind of messaging that happens, I think we are blessed to have this built into our genes. I mean, like today, for example, is the birthday of Krishna, and one of the gods. So we are, we're celebrating and dancing and music. And yes, another very, very important thing in India is celebration and joy. I think joy is very, very powerful in India. In all religions, sharing, eating, celebrating, dancing, music. So I think we're blessed. But I must also say that, for 200 years of British rule, I think the whole thing tilted towards fear and conditional love and so on. But now schools are reclaiming their heritage and are doing exactly what you said, Lisa. We're blessed to be coming back home. And of course, meditation is a very important part of many schools, and even just sitting silently or hugging trees and so on. So we are blessed. And so I'm very heartened to hear what Lisa is saying, but we are lucky. We're lucky. And it is something that can be shared through collaborating for compassion, through our thing of talking to children in other countries. These things will slowly get shared. So I don't know if I responded, Madeline, to what you wanted to ask.
So Gard, go ahead.
So Arun, thank you. I have the privilege of teaching Indian philosophy, Lisa, Lauren, and there's a word in Sanskrit, Satchidananda, which is really a powerful word because it extends beyond any kind of religious tradition. It suggests that there's a quality of transcendence in the universe, that
Yes.
through consciousness, we can achieve a quality of joy or bliss, as Arun said.
Yes.
And this, I think, is for me, the dominant theme in India. And I look to India as sort of the leader of the pack in terms of cultures. When I think of America, I think of a culture that is all about transactions. It's all about GDP. How do we feel? Is the Dow up or is the Dow down? I was once introduced by my father to a wonderful fellow, and he said, I'd like to introduce you to my father, to my son. He's a CPA. And this wonderful person said, it's enough for him to be just your son. And I went, yes. I have three questions for you, Lisa. And Lauren, thank you so much. I've been working with a lady you may know from Georgetown, Abigail Marsh, who's done a lot of work around the amygdala. And what she's indicating through her MRI studies is that the amygdala is not only the source of fear, but it's also the source of altruism. And that the idea of neuroplasticity, that we can, if you will, shift the quality of our awareness, which is what India says, so that something begins to emerge that's more than fear, that's transcendent to fear, which is what all the traditions have suggested. So I'm curious as to your thoughts about Abigail. She studied kidney transplant donors in doing this work. And as we know, there are people who just say, I want to give my kidney, and they don't have a thought as to who it is. So that's the first question. The second question is, goes back to the idea of cultures. And India has, I think, has a legacy of being a spiritual giant in terms of cultural self-understanding. America has a culture, and I think each country carries different qualities of cultures. And has anybody kind of looked at this? Because for me, I'm in the educational sector. I teach at the university. It's really quite scary to see what No Child Left Behind left behind. I see the 3 R's, and I have been a big advocate of play. And the 3 R's and No Child Left Behind stripped play from our schoolyards. In fact, in Nevada, they're told you can either have lunch or play, and that's not a choice. And so the idea of social connection, which is so important, and a friend, Jamil Zaki at Stanford, has written the book, The War for Kindness. And he says that most people have 0 people that they can trust. So it's not inner city or exclusive schools, it's everybody. And when trust disappears, everything implodes. So I'm curious about your sensitivity around culture, national identity, national cultures. And the last is, it's no coincidence, yesterday I was called by some friends. They want to start a school that has a spiritual core to it. And they have been funded by a very well-endowed individual. He's already built the school and he's ready to go. He has pre-K through 2 at this point, wants to take it all the way through 12. So your program this fall, I texted Lauren, I would really like to get information about that because I think what you're doing is groundbreaking. It's so exciting. The first book I have my students read is Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. And also people don't know about his second book, Man's Search for Ultimate Meaning, which brings in the spiritual dimension to this quest for meaning. So I'm just, what can I say? I'm a learner and I'm just so thrilled, Lisa, to be able to be here with you and Lauren and everybody, because what you're doing will begin to shift the culture of the planet. So thank you.
Wonderful. Wow. Wonderful. Where to begin? Well, I guess I'll start with the notion that since there is an innate spiritual core that is 2/3 environmentally formed, there's both universal phenotypes and rich cultural diversity in the expression and strength of the expression of the phenotypes. So we looked, for instance, in India and China and the United States, and all around the world, there was the same phenotypes in their deep sort of form structure. And they were at least 5. There could be more. We found 5. An on-ramp to transcendence, whether it was meditation or prayer or a relationship with nature, an on-ramp to transcendence. In a transcendent state, awareness of unitive, but that we are white caps on one ocean, that we are a point and we are a wave, that we are emanations of one source. So deep interconnectedness or oneness. And love as a mutative force. So not just like happiness, a good emotion, but there was something transformative in love. So again, US, India, China, everyone perceived the deep structure of these phenotypes was the capacity to enter into a transcendent awareness, which was composed of perception of the unitive nature as alongside distinct expression of life, held in love as a mutative force. The 4th phenotype was perception of ethics and values as derived from transcendent awareness, who we are to one another deeply, informing an ethical code. So ethics are not cherry picked based on hedonics. They're not fashionable. It goes back to the suicide call on the phone. An on-ramp, love and oneness, ethics derived from ultimate reality. And the 5th phenotype was altruism, love of neighbor. Now, of all those 5 phenotypes had variance in cultural expression. There were variant levels at which they were strengthened. Yes, India was the strongest, surprise, surprise, but they were everywhere. They were everywhere. We all have this, and there was variability everywhere. There were very spiritual people in the US. There were very spiritual people in China. And there was variance everywhere. Of all the 5 dimensions of phenotypic expression, what might you imagine was the one most correlated with the red brain, the strength of the spiritual brain, the cortical thickness across the regions of spiritual awareness?
Yeah, altruism. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It was altruism, love of neighbor. And love of neighbor calls on the same neuroseat of perception as talking to God or the awareness of spirit in and through nature and life.
Is there a connection to altruism to the amygdala?
So what we saw actually was that altruism was associated with what I'm calling awakened awareness. It involved the parietal, precuneus, and occipital. And I can get even more into it. If we have time, I'll do the short version. It's in the awakened brain. We invited 18 to 25-year-olds into the fMRI, the movie camera MRI that tracks blood flow. And we asked them to tell us about a time they were very stressed and a time where they felt a deep connection to the universe, spirit, God, Jesus, whatever their word was. They're all different cultures, all different faith traditions. And this was a collaboration between the Spirituality Mind Body Institute and our colleagues at Yale Medical School in addictions. And the first thing we found was that the stress narratives did not deal with scaling Kilimanjaro or running a marathon or grappling with Mandarin. The stress narratives did not involve, for young people, challenge. The stress narratives involved, I've got to have it. I've got to get into Stanford. I've got to get the promotion. I've got to get him to, I've got to. And as we reach for the I gotta, of course, the carrot dissipates and there's a new I gotta. That stance of I gotta ran the insula and striatum, which my colleague, who's Mark Potenza, the leader in behavioral addiction, said that is the addicted brain. So I gotta have it is the stance of addiction that strengthens a stance of I've gotta have the promotion, UCLA, cocaine, the internet, right? It doesn't matter what the object of the addiction stance is. The same young person can be invited to put their hand on the gear shift and shift your conversation with life. Tell me now about the time where you felt a deep connection to God, spirit, where instead of being the point, you became the wave. The story shifts and it sounds like this. I'm walking down the sidewalk, 18 through 25-year-olds. I'm feeling like such a loser. I was just turned down at 6 out of 7 medical schools. I'm never going to be a doctor, CPA, like my father and mother. But then I see light in the leaves and I know that life has a plan for me. Or then I see light in the leaves and I know that God has a plan for me, whatever their word is, and I will be a healer in the way that I am intended. In that shift, I'm feeling like such a loser. We were going to get married. I'm so depressed. We had a promise ring. It'd been 3 years. And then the week of graduation, he called it off. I'm so ugly. I'm so worthless. But then I went home and sitting by my grandparents on our front porch, I realized that I am love, that life is made of love. And yeah, I'll love again. The shift, the profound rearrangement of meaning, goodbye, addicted brain, hello, awakened brain. It calls for the bonding network. Just as we were loved and held as children, we are loved and held by life itself. Life is buoyant. A shift in the parietal, which puts in and out hard boundaries. So we see that we are a point and white caps on a wave. That you are your GPS coordinate and I'm at mine and I have my zipped up bodysuit and you're of yours. And yet we're part of one felt known family of life, field of existence, loving consciousness. The bonding network, the parietal, and finally a shift in the attention network from the top down dorsal to the bottom up. So instead of I've got to have it, I've got to get it, looking down a bowling alley, suddenly there's a broad field of existence. And many people say there's a pop for the right direction, guidance. So love, held, guided, and never alone. We are built to perceive. Loved, held, guided, and never alone in relationship to the sea of life, the force of life, source, God, Hashem, Allah, Jesus. We're built for it all around the world. The extent to which we develop it is variant at the level of the family individual and to some extent the culture.
Thank you. We do have a question from, I'm hoping that it's just an email address. Is it Jackie? If you want to turn on your mic and you can ask your question.
Hi, this is Jackie. Hello, Dr. Miller. I so appreciate your wisdom here. Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in that I work with a neurodivergent population, and it seems that we're always prioritizing how to, arm them with strategies and techniques to navigate their world, but we so very rarely prioritize their inner lives as much as we could. And I know, and I've seen in the work that I bring, of course, how important it is. I wondered if you could weigh in a little bit on that.
Thank you. I'm so glad you're raising this important field of education that at times, as you say, can be heavily weighed with transactional, the world of measurement, functionality, the functional human, and the idea that we're evaluated on our level of functionality, that which we can do and produce. And I think you're absolutely right. When I speak with teachers, when I speak with parents, my experience is consistent with yours, that the deep being in the child, there are people who say to me almost every time I share the science, my child is autistic. And I can tell you that I feel this deep, 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 deep connection that bypasses the cognitive. It's this level of love that is so strong, overwhelmingly strong. And that is the level of transformational love connection that is possible with every student. So yes, and I hope you'll carry forward your voice.
Great. Arun, you have your hand up, and
Yes.
I'm also going to give you an assignment. Since you are the next presenter for the EdNet
Yes.
forum, instead of
Yes.
me explaining what it is, I'm going to challenge you and say, how is it that the next EdNet forum that we're going to have really is a bridge from what Lisa has given us today to the project that we're involved in. So
Beautiful, beautiful.
And-
Thank you for challenging me with your wonderful invitation. Thank you, Marilyn. So first, the reason I raised my hand was because one of the thoughts we have is in India is called unconditional okayness. No matter which part of the world you're from, no matter what your culture, you're okay, because I think, as you put it very beautifully, Lisa, we are all part of the same universal source. And source in its wisdom has made us in a certain way, has given us certain culture, given us certain gifts. Now, coming back to the next session, it will be on youth collaborating for compassion, which is really an attempt to get young children from all over the world, school children, to just connect and talk with people all over the world. I mean, just to give you an example, a school in South India is talking to children in East Java, and they're telling them about temples and their dances, and there's a huge exuberance in the atmosphere. And they also say, how can we be more compassionate? What are you guys doing in East Java, which we can learn from? What are we doing in Pune, India, which you can learn from, or South India? And I'm just give you a little story. We started this with an interaction between a school in Pune and a school in Karachi, Pakistan. Now, at the political level, they're enemies, but the children warmed up to each other so much, and they started sharing all kinds of stories. And they said, today we will celebrate this meeting by going to Delhi Sweets in Karachi, which is the best sweet shop. And the Pune children said, we have 10 Karachi sweet shops in Pune, and we're all the same. So I think through shared stories, we fear people whose stories we don't know. But once you get to learn the story, once you make this heartfelt connection, as you've been saying, Lisa, you begin to discover a shared humanity, a shared oneness, a shared world of love. And this is what the next session is going to be about. And thanks for the opportunity to share, Marilyn. And we are very, very excited about it because we are enrolling schools from all over the world. And we see this as a great opportunity for young people to step forward in roles of leadership by giving them the space. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arun. I'm hoping we have just a very few minutes here, but one of the aspects that we're going to be presenting, hopefully, on the 15th is this map of co-creators. And the idea is that you register on the map your area of interest, your area of passion, and you're able to find people around the world who share that same passion with you. And this is a map that is now on our website. We invite people who are here to please go to the site. Merida, maybe you can put the link in the chat box, and we're hoping that all of you would take this map and make it your own. If you're from an organization, please brand it in the way that you think is appropriate. There's one master map, And so, we hope that we'll have tens of thousands of people eventually on this map. We're told that it can take care of 1 million people or more. And we want people to begin the process of really sharing with one another. So please take advantage of that and come and join us on the 15th with Arun and ourselves. And we'll continue this conversation. And Lisa, we will make certain that we put up the opportunities that you've offered us today and build them into our own events calendar so that people hopefully won't forget about them. Again, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Lisa. This has been a wonderful shared experience.
Thank you. It was wonderful to join the community.
And we'll see you also, we should say, in Encuentro Mundial de Valores in Mexico. Lisa will be there along with Christina. Christina, do you want to, we have a minute or so left. So maybe you want to say something about Encuentro so that making an invitation to everyone.
Yes, well, Lisa is going to be there with another 40 speakers from around the world talking about the transformation, the transformation power of women. And it's going to be beautiful, all the information that we are going to be having from different sectors. Right now, I just talked with Maria Neira, who is the president of the Organización Mundial de la Salud, is health world organization, and she is going to be also part of the event. So we'll be talking about education, about all these beautiful and very needed thematics, so you are all invited. There is going to be information there in Charter for Compassion too, and the dates are 9 and 10 of September 9 and 10. So thank you very much. And thank you, Lisa, for being here in that time.
Yeah. And we'll be getting out within the next 24, 48 hours a recording from today. And we'll put all of the links that Merida has put in the chat in that communication to you. And we thank you all for coming today. Hopefully you'll join us on the 15th. And if at all possible, we'll see you in Mexico. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Oh, bye-bye.